Absolutely. Quite, discussion going on even as you were during the break with my guests, Paul, Aginah, and Stephen Ndengwa, gentlemen who are well versed in matters international relations. Before the break, Aginah, you were talking about NATO.
Yes, I was talking about NATO.
Yes.
And the reason is, international politics depends on state interest.
Yes.
That is Kenya's interest at this particular juncture. And this system is self-help. Everybody is fighting for survival. So your interests come first before you think of your neighbor or whoever within the system. So there's no single way you're going to tell me that you're secure if you don't have a padlock in your house and the neighbor is more secure. You'll want first of all to ensure that you are secure, you're safe, and all that. So it starts from within. So state interest first before we go the regional or African context.
Okay.
But the challenge is if you look at NATO, NATO has got some negative connotation partly because when you look at majority of African scholars, we try to look at it from the operation in Libya, which many in the international system look at it as a failed mission. Remember, Libya was attacked during the Obama time and it was by NATO ally. And the country was flourishing economically, socio-culturally, but after intervention by NATO, the country today is wallowing in miasma of poverty. So NATO to some extent also look at the operation in Iraq, whereby in the Middle East also, there are people who felt like it was too much force used in Iraq. Otherwise, there were other alternative mechanisms to deal with the situation. So by Kenya becoming a close ally, Kenya is trying to apply the principle of that self-defense. But remember that Kenya is not the only country in Africa that is a close ally to NATO. Already we've got countries like Morocco, we've got Tunisia, we've got Egypt, and Kenya is becoming the fourth country. If you look at this close allied nature of Kenya to NATO, it simply tells you of the United States' geopolitical interest in the continent. Look at the countries that have been given this close neighborliness and being recognized as a very close ally to NATO. Look at that block or that seaway. From Mediterranean, you pass via the Suez Canal, and then Red Sea, then you find yourself to Indian Ocean. It is a great trade route for international trade. So it tells you that by recognizing Kenya as a close NATO ally, the interest is on pacifying what is happening in the Red Sea, the Houthi rebels. That's where I stand.
That's where you stand.
Yes.
And so, looking forward, I was looking at the foreign policy. By the way, in terms of debunking, because our topic, of course, is on Kenya's foreign policy, do successive governments need to come with their foreign policies once they, come into power?
I think in terms of foreign policy, and why we never seem to get it right as a nation in terms of international relations, is because everyone comes with their own agenda. And mostly it's not informed agenda. A foreign policy is, there's a basic, what you can call irreducible minimums in a foreign policy. And if you take into considerations who are we take into considerations our culture, our demographics, our history, so that we come first of all, and how do we relate, So in any relationship, for example, if I go back to his idea about marriage, even when you are courting someone and you want a relationship, there's a basic minimum. You say, I am George. And there are certain things like, I don't believe that, a lady should go out and drink alone at night and come back at midnight, Or, there are some things that you say that if you're going to have a stable home, then there are those things that, whether we like it or not, must be there to have a stable home. So even in countries, for example, it should be about us, okay? Let us not dangle, dangle our sovereignty to the highest bidder, because that is what we do, okay? So now after like 2 decades, so we have realized, China may not be, the grass is green on the other side, so we jump ship. I'm not saying we have jumped ship from the east, but by the look of things, of course, we are embracing, the Western ideology, whether it is through allies or directly through the US or people like NATO and so forth. So I think our foreign policy should have a true north. So in a way that it's a lighthouse, So when you put, for example, Kenya's whatever with NATO, don't just sign documents without us giving conditions and say yes. You know, now we have just been brought NATO documents, sign. You don't. You're selling your sovereignty away. Because sometimes NATO overrides international law when they are doing their business. And you know, when it's talking about Libya, for example, when Barack Obama was asked a question, is there online, what is your worst regret as president of the US? He said it was the killing of Muammar Gaddafi. He says that should not have happened, as he has rightly, you know, referred to, you know, because it was just somebody's gripe. So they used NATO to undermine the whole country, and it was a jewel. But they were envious, I don't know, jealous of Muammar Gaddafi, because he was setting a bad example to the rest of Africa. Okay, that you can get premium pay for your resources and make life enjoyable for your people. You see. But for us, our leaders just give out our resources as long as their pockets are full. They don't care for the communities from where these resources come from. So it's not just, a foreign policy is not just a theoretical document. It's something that should be cast in stone, those bare minimums. Okay. So if it's NATO coming, we say, okay, we need to consult our academicians. Also, although here professors and whatever are symbols of ridicule. And in developed economies and so forth, it is academicians, professors, doctors who run, you know, the technocrats, okay, who run the show. That's why they're developed. If you look at Kibaki's cabinet, you don't need to be told why we hit, you know, new highs of development. It is because they are thinkers, think tanks, people who are able to read, you know, data and analyze and see strategies that can be used. So if it's NATO, for example, we should have interrogated the contract, if you can call it that way, or the agreement. So we bring it to our security experts here. We tell them, can you go through this thing? We have a month. Go sleep over it. Let us look at the whatever and what we need to change so that we are always the ones who can, you know, there are always exit clauses. If we say, like 2 years from now, China and the US go head to head over Taiwan, you know, which is a likely, you know, a military confrontation might just occur there. So are we going to side with NATO, or are we going to go through the UN system, which we are signatories of our One China system, you know, the One China principle, which we have agreed to? So there are those contradictions that we must be able to interrogate and have competent people to advise the government, not through whims and, you know, and stuff like that. Yeah. Again,
as you come in, we've seen this government has been quite vocal in, you know, associating itself with certain policies, certain stands, you know, geopolitics, and, you know, whatever is happening. Do you think that perhaps it's a new, you know, policy, foreign policy, and that perhaps, you know, has informed the Kenya Kwanza government, even as you, you know, chime into what he was saying?
You see, when you're talking of foreign policy, yes. We are talking of general objectives that most of the time are trying to inform how a country, and in this regard, Kenya, should relate or interact with other players within the globe. That is international relations. And if you look at these objectives, Kenya, within our foreign policy document of 2014, yes, when Ambassador Amina Mohammed was the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Yes. If you look at those objectives, one of the key objectives there is to safeguard the country's sovereignty and and international and national territorial boundary. Then there's also this bit of promoting of economic relations. There's the aspect of environment, and then if you look at all this, you don't just get into it without values. This is a country whereby we have values that guide us when you're dealing with matters foreign policy. For example, if you look at Kenya, by and large, we stand for equality and justice within the international system. And looking at, for example, this value and principle, it's under which you find Kenya, for example, arguing differently. If you're to remember Ambassador Kimani at the United Nations taking very firm stance on some certain issues that, according to him, and even us as a country, believed these are some of the things we stood for. But again, remember, foreign policies, they're dynamic. Foreign policy of a country is dynamic.
As is government.
As is the government, because it depends on the government's manifesto. Remember, for example, if you had to look at the Kenya Kwanza government, there were promises. For example, the housing project was one of their key campaign tool in their manifesto. They had promised for universal health coverage and all that. So it means once a government takes power, that is through social contract. We vote this government, we get into a deal, 5-year deal. So within these 5 years, I'm supposed to achieve 1, 2, 3, 4, that which I promised in my manifesto. So it means the person wielding this power in the name of the President of the Republic of Kenya now, start now pulling strings on how to achieve that which he promised the people. So looking at where we stand, the challenge has been successive governments have been taking different standpoints. But from where I stand, I feel like our foreign policy should largely be guided by the Constitution. That is Constitution of Kenya 2010, which I agree personally that we borrowed a lot from what is there within the Constitution of Kenya.
Yes.
But apart from this, any other thing that we are doing should be for the benefit of the Republic. As we speak right now, for example,
yes,
Kenya is facing the challenge of unemployment. The president has been trying left, right, and center to talk about manufacturing, textile industry, and also revamping this economy. That's why you find that on 15th or 13th, is likely to travel to Italy. What is Italy known for? Italy does very well in agricultural sector, textile industry. Talk of any Kenyan around, everybody I tend to believe is well conversant with Gucci. But again, as we are taking this out there, the question should be, we as a country, what are we taking to the world? Because when you're talking of the motor vehicle industry, for example, if you're talking of Germany, what comes into your mind? The German machine, the BMWs. Mercedes. When you're talking of Japan, you see the Toyotas around here. When you're talking of Italy, you see even the pizza as a cuisine within our country.
Pasta.
So the question, pasta and many more. So what are we taking as a country to the global world, the international system? So that is something that the country should also dig deep and work on, because while we are talking of manufacturing, what are we producing? What is our identity? Because most of the time you find that Kenya is identified based on socio-cultural perspective. That is Eliud Kipchoge winning some marathon, some sports like the Shujaa team. So what are we locally manufacturing that identify us as Kenya that we are taking to the globe?
And I mean, I've seen you agree.
I think that is exactly what I was talking about, in other words.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I said there's a basic. Of course, things keep changing. But if you change things fundamentally, then you lose your identity. If you look at, for example, Kibaki came up with, of course, he schemed all the national development plans, the 5-year development plans that were there. And he came up with Aginah 2030. Now, Aginah 2030, he did 10 years. And we had some seismic movements in the economy. I would have expected someone like Uhuru Kenyatta, the former president, to come and say, I think I will not touch Kibaki's game plan economically. This is what we need, okay? But what does he do? He comes and reinvents the wheel, Agenda 4. And simply because maybe some cronies around him want a piece of the pie, so they want to set up different, avenues for pilferage of public resources. So again there, then you have, I don't know, so we keep changing goalposts and keep changing plans, okay? Of course, we have to keep changing with the global situation, yeah? But then, you don't change the fundamentals, okay? So at this stage of our economy, as you're saying, you go to Italy, if you look at, for example, as in South Korea, South Korea is known for which products?
Technology, Samsung.
Yes, Samsung.
Yeah.
Now, do you know Samsung Electronics is the biggest, yeah? Samsung Electronics can loan this country money. You know, it has, I think, more revenue than, if you look at it, it almost rivals the Kenya's economy, yeah? And people like LG, Energy Solutions, Kia Motors. These are just units of, and those are our Safaricoms, okay? but they can have Safaricom for lunch. People just like Samsung, you know, it can just have it for lunch and wipe its hands. Yeah. So we in these countries we keep saying, oh, you know, South Korea, the last I don't know how many 40 years we were at the same level. So what happened that these guys took off and left us behind? You know, that is what, those are things that we must be very retrospective about. We must ask ourselves the hard questions. But if we keep moving from one height to the other, now Italy calls, oh, Italy wants us, so Iran. Or South Korea, you know. Italy, of course, you know, they have the Malindi, you know, their community, small community, which is like you can say they are almost like the Happy Valley during colonialism. Okay?
Yes, yes,
I was in high school in Malindi. And yeah, Italians, yeah, they are good people actually. They are not, although there was rumors that a lot of mafiosi live there. But basically, the Italians are good people. Okay, they're not racist as such or anything. Yeah, they blend very well with the local economy, with the local people. But Malindi, there's the circle. It's called the what? It's called the satellites. Exploration center, San Marco.
San Marco, yes.
It's there. So we don't have huge economic and diplomatic interests with Italy. So you wonder now, we go there, what are we going to get from Italy? So as it says, apart from the athletics that, you know, will be exported to the world, I think Kenyans have serious brains, okay? Because Kenyans are working in very top-notch places abroad. And if we have governments that are really serious about developing the country, these are brains that we can tap to. And during Kibaki's time, actually I have started seeing people were planning to come back to Kenya, you know. People are saying, oh, I hear Kenya is, you know, things are starting to move. Because I'm telling you, more than half of the people living abroad, if this country were to have some basic infrastructure, this is heaven. And people will tell you, I think you have relatives.
Yes.
Yeah? Although I saw you running in Atlanta, I could follow your status. And I could see you running all over the US, you know, which of course was good fun, yeah? But even as but life is hard. Now, apart from the hype and so forth, but getting down to it, life in the US and in those European countries is hard, yeah? And somebody was saying, I would rather stay here broke, because you cannot get broke you cannot afford to get broke in the West.
In the West.
Yes, and things are very tough.
Kakamen?
With due respect, I'd like to differ slightly with what my beloved friend here, Ndengwa, has just talked about.
Yes.
That is in regards that we don't have much to gain from Italy. Honestly speaking, if you look at Italian economy, we are talking of a country that is the third best in terms of GDP in European Union. At the same time, if you look at Italy, we have got an economy that largely 70% of it depends on service. If you look at this country, for example, as we speak, service industry is playing a very key role. Look at the banking sector, insurance, and many more, even the education system. So for me, I feel like there's a lot that we can gain from Italy. And if you look at the Italian economy, Italy does very well in manufacturing and in the agricultural sector. And if you are to recall what President said a few days ago on Madaraka, where he talked of taking a lot of resources into the leather industry, textile, and also revamping some industries within Western Kenya, agricultural sector. So you find that we have a lot actually to borrow from Italy that also in terms of agriculture is doing tremendously well in Europe. In fact, even fertilizer, we can even get into a deal whereby we can take some of our best minds there, go study how to produce more of this, come over here so that we can benefit our farmers and not give them fake fertilizer, sorry to say this. And at the same time, if you look at Italy from where I stand, Kenya during COVID, many Italians, unfortunately, God forbid, were swept away. You understand the age and also the challenges. Kenya and Africa at large has got a youthful population, some of whom are also looking for opportunities. The US, I'm also happy to see that you did a very good coverage when you were at Atlanta, Georgia, in the US.
Thank you.
Most of the remittances we are getting in this country is coming from the US. Why don't we have some of our citizens in Italy also to also add into the diaspora, remittances from diaspora from Italy. And finally, thank you, brother. Finally, if you look at Kenya as we are, as service industry is being more or less exonerated, most of the tourists along the coast, name it Kilifi, Malindi, they're coming from Italy. When they come over here and they're spending their cash here, that's why I come back to the question of what are we taking to the world? Let's take Swahili cuisine, Swahili dishes. To be out there, I would like a scenario where you walk into one of the hotels in Atlanta and you go and say, I want to take some biryani. You're served with a plate of biryani. And then you walk into another place and then somebody tells you that, oh, here we're having some Kiswahili classes. Then you feel like you're still home. Nyama
there
choma.
Is such a restaurant actually in DC.
Great.
But, perhaps you're hoping for more.
For more, exactly.
To be able to sample.
Yes, and also within our agricultural system, I feel like let's add value. Let's do value addition. Let's stop exporting what we call raw materials to the outside world. Why don't we do value addition within the country, then sell finished product so that when it comes to the BOP balance of payment, we can also have slightly reduced the deficit within our balance of payment. So with due respect, I feel like senior Italy, we can really do much with Italy. And the parliament has been making a lot of noise based on the Malindi space. Where the Italians in the early 1960s, they took some space area within Malindi, and they've not been playing ball along as probably our interests are based. So these are things that we can also go back and renegotiate. Exactly.
Okay, George, I think, okay, first
so
of all.
that we end up on Italy.
Yes. First of all, we are spreading ourselves too thin. You see, we are latching from one partner to the other. Italy, South Korea, where, So we seem to be everywhere.
Isn't that a good thing?
It is not.
Yes. Really?
Even you here, for example, if you are dealing with everyone, you say, oh, I can get something from George, so you go to George. You leave him there. Then you hear, oh, I don't know who else is doing this. Then you run, you see? So people will say, where are your principles? Or what do you have to offer? So that you better have a few friends. Someone will say, you better have a few high-value friends, than have a multitude of people who is just noise, you see? And number two, that's now, we look like beggars, okay? Because now everywhere you are going is take. What are we giving out in return? And you just mentioned something that makes sense and said, we need value addition. But how long are we going to take to do these things? We have been independent for 6 decades. What can Kenya say it produces? Apart from coffee, I don't know what, and we take them raw out there. What do we really have to offer, And instead of saying, you see, like, is it Ghana that stopped the export of cocoa? Or which country? Yeah. And say, no, we are going to, if you want to do your business, if you want our cocoa, come and put up Cadbury's. Yes, here. There's no more cocoa that is going out. So that by the time it leaves, it is a product of Ghana.
So you see,
those value addition kind of things, So even tea, those blended teas, whatever they say, they should come out of here, product of Kenya, high valued products. You see, and that's how people like some countries have developed in Asia. They told the West, bring your foreign direct investments here. You will go to some of these major Asian cities, you'll find Rolls Royce. You find Rolls Royce in one of the big cities in Asia. And of course they went there because of cheap labor and all that, And then they didn't just open their doors. They just said, okay, you bring whatever here, but we have a strategy. We are the ones to call the terms and say, you want to bring your high-valued production here because it's cheaper for us to do here, and we have a good work ethic, and we have the resources that can support this industry. Then you say, we need what percentage of your foreign direct investment. You have to give us some percentage. And then you must also do with technology transfer. That is how some of these Asian guys have developed, because they're the ones who call the shots, okay? But otherwise, you have seen that we are in this, this record. If you are there during UUR.com, I don't know if you made that record, yeah? There's a time that the song could go, so there's a problem with the pin.
Santuri.
So, Santuri, yeah. So the thing just goes on. So that's how we have been for 60 years. I'm sorry.
So then, when you look at, the tectonic plates and, the stands that we seem to be taking, Ruto, the president, was in the West 2 weeks ago. He is now in the East, and he has said Kenya is the home of mankind. You all are welcome.
Yeah.
Are we, back to the, initial conversation you were talking about. Moi looked West, and then, he was disappointed.
Yes.
Kibaki came in and he looked East. Uhuru seemed to be playing a balance. When you look at President Ruto's strategy, and in terms of, the famous looking East or West, or North or South, where are we looking?
Thank you. Before I answer your question,
yes,
let me just throw a punch on his last point. Very good one. And I am actually just more or less supporting him by saying that by promoting our stuff out there, the president ought to have started by going to the US using KQ. Yes. Yeah, so that fly Kenya, made in Kenya, it's Kenyan affair.
Yeah,
so our brand, international image out there. Now back to your question.
Yes.
What is happening right now? President Ruto is using a balancing act. By balancing act here is, I feel it's a very good thing to have as many friends as you can in the international system, because each and every friend in the international system has got something to offer. And you too, you can always find an opportunity or even create new markets in that territory that you might have considered terranalias, that there was nothing there. You can go and create something in it. So I feel like that balancing act, if you look at President Ruto, where he stands is, while our foreign policy document talks of us being non-aligned, that is, we are only cooperating mutually based on interest. But to a larger perspective, if you observe President William Ruto, is more or less aligned himself towards the West. And I recall in one of the interviews, I don't recall the channel very well, or the media house, but I remember him being asked whether we are facing West or facing East, but then he responded affirmatively that we are neither facing East nor West, but rather facing forward. By facing forward here, I tend to think and believe that the president meant that the country's interest supersedes whether facing East or facing West. So what should be controlling or rather guiding our foreign policy here is basically our national what? National interest. And therefore the balancing act here is, if you look at President Ruto today in Seoul, Korea, South Korea is more close to the Western allies as compared to the East. Geographically, the country is in Asian continent, yes, in the Far East. But ideologically, economically, politically, it aligns itself most of the time with the Western friends. Italy, the same, that President William Ruto is to visit in a couple of days from today. A few days ago, the president was in the US. This is still the West. So if you look at president, but then at the same time, there's no single place where we've been told that the president has renounced Kenyans' neighborliness and close ties, diplomatic ties with the East, like China, Brazil, India, and many more. So what is coming up here is, in a multiplex world order, in an international system whereby we've got different powerhouses playing within the so-called international system, it means you have more or less to have a balance so that at any given time, you safeguard your interest. If economically my interests are best safeguarded if I face China, then go protect your interest in China. If militarily, politically, my interests are best safeguarded when I face the United States of America, then well and good. If I've got a huge population here of unemployed youth and I'm looking for employment for them, and I realize that most of them can be employed, some in Canada, some in Germany, some in Brazil, well and good. Let the remittances come back home. Remember, as we speak, anybody and everybody in the entire world system originated from Kenya. If you can dig deep and read the works of Cheikh Anta Diop, Africa, the origin of civilization, Turkana, Fort Tenan, Rusinga Island, even anthropologists like the likes of what's the name of this great Louis Leakey. They did their research here and came out with very good research that the origin of man, the origin of human race, and by man here, I'm not male chauvinistic, I mean both female and male, yes, originated from this part of the continent. So it simply means that we are developing diplomatic ties with our descendants, those who came from this part of the world. Thank you.
Brilliant. And on that note, let's take a break. We come back and then we pick Stephen's mind on whether we are facing east, west, or as President Ruto said,
or south,
or north, or forward. You're watching the Daily Report. You're back in a few minutes. Stay with us.